Well, we're thrilled to welcome Papa Bruce Whitten. He is grandpa to the Copeland family, and he used to work at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And so he's here today to tell us all about horseshoe crabs. And I also want to thank the Stowe Cultural Council and the Randall Library Friends for making this program possible. So, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. I'm delighted that you all are here today. And I want to tell you about one of my favorite marine organisms. This is called the horseshoe crab. Our species here is called Limulus polyphemus, which I don't expect you to remember. Horseshoe crabs are not actually crabs at all. When they first saw horseshoe crabs, they thought they were crabs because they had the claws. By the way, while I'm giving this talk, you can refer to the molt, which basically has all the anatomical features of the crab. And I will also refer to information which are in these two handouts here. Okay, and one of them has a build your own crab 3D model. So if you can't see internal parts on this, you can see them on these handouts. So anyway, they were called crabs because they have the claws and a hard shell, just like crabs do. But these guys are actually first cousins of scorpions and spiders. Okay, and as we go on, I'll tell you why they are like that. Actually, if you look at this mold, which I have taken apart, actually I didn't take it apart, it fell apart. But doesn't that look like a spider? Okay. And it has these two little mouth parts right here that are called chelicera, and they share that in common with the spiders and the mites and the ticks and the scorpions. And in spiders, those little organs are made into the fangs that inject poison. But spider crabs are totally safe and harmless. Okay. Now, this crab has the unique honor of being the oldest animal that still is exactly as it was 450 million years ago. That's why it looks so ancient and creepy. It's called a living fossil. And these guys were hundreds of millions of years old when the dinosaurs were roaming the earth. So they are old guys. And what that tells you is that their body plan, what they do, is very good because they've lived through major disasters and catastrophes on the earth exactly as they are now. Now, if you look at the back of this page right here, that will show you where there are the 4 species of horseshoe crabs that are still in the world are. 3 of them are in the Pacific Ocean, and they are endangered because of what people have done to them. And the 4th species, the one that we're going to talk about today, is our horseshoe crab. You can see it right here. So our horseshoe crab is found in the Atlantic Ocean on our coast. They're most common in Delaware Bay, where there are still millions of horseshoe crabs in that body of water. They used to be much more abundant than they are now. The numbers are much reduced, and we'll talk about what people have done to cause that over the years. The horseshoe crabs, yes.
West coast of Florida. I live on the west coast. And
Yes.
to see horseshoe crabs.
Their horseshoe crabs range all the way from northern Maine down to the Yucatan Peninsula in the Gulf of Mexico. So they can tolerate water that's very cold, and they can tolerate water that's very warm. So that's one of the reasons why they probably survive so long, because they can take a wide range of temperature. They also tolerate a wide range of salinity, so they can be in brackish water or full salt water. And there are actually 4 subspecies in the ones that are here in the Atlantic Ocean, and we're part of one of the 2 northern groups. The southern groups are different from the northern groups because they're active year-round, they breed year-round, so the ones you see in Florida might come in and spawn on a high tide in June. So, but the horseshoe crabs that I'm going to talk about up here, the ones that we see here, in the wintertime they become very quiet. They just live on the bottom of the ocean, and they don't feed, and they just wait till the water warms up. Yes?
We need to get the horseshoe crabs that you're showing tonight.
The horseshoe crabs, well, they come from a variety of sources. One of them was actually given to me by the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History. One of the small ones, it's 1-year-old. They raised it from an egg. So, and the others were collected by my daughter and my grandchildren in West Falmouth, Massachusetts, and off of Chappaquiddick Island in the back marsh. So, What? And that's where they're going back, yes. So, yeah, the rules for horseshoe crab collection is that they need to be returned to the ocean. So I'm doing this as an educational program here, but we're taking very good care of these guys. I've had them actually for a month, and they're well fed, and they're going to be returned to the place that they came from when we're done with this presentation. So let me get back to where I was here. So a horseshoe crab doesn't become a mature adult until it's 8 or 9 years old, and they live, on average, the ones that don't meet the bad end with a predator, for 20 years, and there are specimens that are 30 years old. So they live 2 or 3 times as long as your dog. So I'm not recommending you get a pet horseshoe crab instead of a dog, but if you do, they would live a lot longer than your dog. So now I want to talk about reproduction. Okay, so this is something that we see around here in the late spring and the early summer. So the horseshoe crab in our part of the world don't mate year-round. They only mate in the spring. And as the water warms, the horseshoe crabs live in the continental shelf. They move inshore. The males come in 2 weeks ahead of the females. And the females then come in to spawn. They come with the highest high tides, which would occur with a new moon or a full moon. And so the males are waiting in a line in the shallow water. The females come through. This, by the way, is a female. The mating females are generally larger than the males, and we'll talk about that when we talk about how they grow. But a female will come through the row of males, and one male will grab a hold of her. They have a modification that we'll also talk about that lets them cling on to the female's shell. She pulls up into the sand above the waterline, and actually, if you look in this handout here, there's a picture of the mating crabs right there. It actually says medical uses of horseshoe crabs. So that's a mating assemblage right there. You can see the large one in the center is a female, and then there's a male attached to her, and then behind her are other males that want to get in on the action, okay? So a female will then scoop out sand to a depth of about 6 inches and will lay 3,000 to 4,000 blue-green eggs. Then she moves forward, and the male, we'll use my hat here as a male, will then fertilize the eggs, okay? She has laid 3,000 or 4,000 eggs. She will now move further up or laterally on the beach, and she'll do it again. And she'll lay up to 20,000 eggs in one tidal cycle, and they'll do it multiple cycles. So a nice female like this can lay 80,000 eggs in the breeding cycle. So that's a lot of eggs. So now, let's talk about what happens to those eggs. So the eggs are laid, and they will hatch in 2 to 4 weeks. Again, coordinate with the high tides that are coming in. Oops, sorry. Hello. So, and in order for a horseshoe crab to grow, they are like other crabs and lobsters in that they have to molt. Is everybody familiar with what that means? If you're going to grow and your outside is hard, you have to get out of your outside. And that's what horseshoe crabs do, and crabs and lobsters do. The crabs and lobsters come out through the back of their shell, and the horseshoe crab is different in that it comes out through the front of its shell. Okay? So, and actually, a larval horseshoe crab will molt 4 times in the egg before it hatches. It then hatches at about 2 to 4 weeks of age, and it climbs out of the sand and moves into the ocean to begin its development. Some of the eggs, some small percentage of the eggs, actually won't hatch and will wait a full year to hatch. And it's a small percentage, but the advantage to that is if, when the little ones hatch, if the conditions are bad, if there's a lot of predators out there that eat them, then you've got at least part of the population that will come the next year to get you through a bad year. So that, and the fact that they're so tolerant of salt and water temperatures, is one reason why they've lived for such a long time as the species that they are. So the babies then feed and go through 6 molts in their first year. And then they become this little guy right here. This one is 1 year old, right here. And basically, from the second molt out of the egg, they look like miniature adults. When they come out of the egg, they do not have the tail, that telson. So, but they develop that with the first molt. And so these little tiny guys look just like that guy right there from their first year of age. And so then in the second year, they will molt 2 to 3 times. In the third year, they'll molt twice. And then in the fourth year, they just molt once. And they do that continuously. And they go through, the males will go through 17 to 18 molts till they become adults. And then the females will go through 1 extra molt. So every time a horseshoe crab comes out of its old shell, it grows 25 or 30% bigger than it was before. So the female goes through 1 more molt than the male, so she's bigger. She's the boss, okay. So she's coming out. And if you look at the molts that you have on your tables, you can see most of them have an opening right here in the front. So if you want to collect molts of your own, the horseshoe crabs, you don't want to take breeding horseshoe crabs in the spring. But in the late summer, early fall, is when the older crabs go through their actual molts. So you'll find a lot of the molts on the beach. And in fact, a friend of mine has collected, I hope you all will be careful with those because they don't actually belong to me. But she's collected a lot of different molts of different sizes here. And I have a little task that you can do when you're done. You can take the one that's on your table and the ones that are in here, and you can figure out how old they are and which one of their molts you're holding. So if you want to do that after the talk, you're welcome to come up and try that out. All right? So,
How old is that big one that you have?
that is a very good question. So once they become adult, they're not going to molt anymore. So one way you can tell that one is older is by the amount of crusting organisms that have on it, because these guys also serve as a community for mussels and limpets, and some worms live on their shells. They have a lot of passengers that ride on them. So you can tell an old crab shell by the number of things they have on it. So when they freshly molt, obviously they leave that behind, and their new shell is clean like this one. So, but generally, that one all I can tell you is that it's more than 9 years old. More than 9. Given its size, I would say probably this is more like a 10, 12-year-old crab at least.
1 year, how big are they?
At 1 year, that's, well, actually, this is the molt that the little crab I was given by the museum. And so I know that that's a year old because we know when that egg was collected. So that's how big they are at a year. Is that cute? You can pass that around if you want. Just be gentle with it. And actually, that crab is the molt that, this is another one of the same age right here that's on the screen right now. And you can see that crab looks just like this in miniature. So, all right. So now, the next thing I want to talk about, I didn't mention what horseshoe crabs eat. Does anybody know what horseshoe crabs eat? They eat clams, they eat worms, they eat dead fish, they find plant materials in their gut. They kind of eat everything they come across. They're like little vacuum cleaners going along the bottom of the ocean. And they're really cool feeding machines, but we're going to talk about that as I tell you about the parts of the animal. So the horseshoe crab has 3 body parts. If you look at it like this, there's this big helmet at the front, which is it's called a cephalothorax or a prosoma. I don't expect you to remember all those words, so we'll call it the head for today. This part right here we'll call the abdomen. It's the opisthossoma, another fancy word, but that's the second portion. And the third portion is the tail or telson. Now that looks really scary, doesn't it? But it's actually, it is a good defensive weapon. So in other words, it protects them from things that would come up behind them. But there's no poison to it, and these things are really harmless. And in fact, the connection is kind of delicate. So if you come across a live horseshoe crab in the wild, if it's upside down and you want to do it a favor and turn it right side up again, always hold it by the head part right here when you're turning it over. Never hold them by that, because that could damage them too much. Now, what is that thing for, besides keeping things creeping up from behind, from grabbing them? That tail is actually what they use to turn themselves right side up. If you look at them, their legs are all inside that big shell. So if you're upside down like this, how is he going to get himself back over right side up? He's not, unless he's got this thing on here. So they use that to push themselves up and flip back over again. So one problem for these guys when they're having their spawning is they're up in very shallow water. There's a lot of wave action that comes in and flips them over. And when that happens, the water is too shallow for them to flip themselves back over with their tail. So up to 10%, 1 in 10 of these crabs will die during the spawning season just from getting flipped over and not being able to right themselves again. So if you come across a crab during spawning season that's upside down, do him a favor and flip him over. So often the shell will get filled with sand, and they're pretty resistant to being out of water for a while because obviously they're breeding. They have the ability to close off their gills to keep water in there, but they can't go through too much of a tide cycle or in too hot a weather, or they will die. So you want to flip them back over again if you come across one like that. Yes?
When is their spawning cycle?
Their spawning cycle, they spawn in the late spring from April till June, but the peak of it is usually May and June on the highest tides, the end of May, beginning of June, so at the high tides. But they will, and it's usually at night, which makes sense, again, because you want to avoid predation. So when they're flipped over like that, gulls and other seabirds love to get at their soft inner parts there that are now available to them. So, all right. So, let's see. We were talking about the parts here. Now let's talk about some of the parts that are on the underside. So you can look on your molt, and if you look in here, there's a nice picture of the underside of the horseshoe crab right there you can look at. And I have for some of you, I have some of these. This is what happens when you can make this into a horseshoe crab. Okay, so this is a 3D model of a horseshoe crab. And if some of you are interested, it's complicated. It's about a half hour of careful scissor work and tape work. So I'd recommend you take it home rather than doing it today. But anyway, so if you refer to that, let's look at the parts. All right, we talked a little bit about those mouth parts there. Those are the chelicera. Their job is to stick food into the mouth of the crab. Then the next thing, we have 5 pairs of legs. And the first 4 of them are just walking legs that have claws on the end of them. And they're also sensory, so they can find food with those claws and move it to the mouth. The last set of walking legs are modified. They have like brooms on the end of them. Those are called pushers. Pusher legs, can you see those? And that helps them. If you can see them here, the ones that are in the thing, you can see when they go across the sand, you'll see they leave little tracks where these things. This lets them push into the sand and bulldoze through the sand. And for the females, it helps them to stir the sand up when they're laying their eggs. So that's a wonderful adaptation when you live on the sand at the bottom. Oh, I failed to mention, horseshoe crabs also can swim. And the little ones swim fairly often. They swim when they're for the first week when they're in the water. But the way they swim is by using their gills, and they swim upside down. Okay? And the other purpose of this tail is to act as a rudder, to help them steer when they're going through the water like that. All right, so we'll come back and talk about the mouth and feeding in just a minute. So now the next portion are the things that are in the abdomen. This flap right here, which I don't know if you can see on here, is called the operculum. It's a flat lid, and they can use that to close up the gills to keep water in them when they're stranded on shore. And the organs that deliver the eggs and the sperm when they're mating are at the bottom of that particular flap. The other 5 pairs of flaps right there are their gills. So they're called book gills because they look like pages, and that is where they do their oxygen exchange to keep themselves alive. But they're swimming. So if you see these guys swimming in the tank upside down, those gills are flapping like that to move them along. So now I want to talk a little bit about the digestive system here in the food system. I said they're little walking feeding machines. So their mouth is right in the center of the legs. It's right down in there, and you can't see it. And the mouth has no teeth and has no hard parts for chewing the food. So instead, at the base of the legs, they have these hard bristles. So when they move their legs to move the food in, they tear the food apart and grind it up so that it's ready to go into their mouth. Then the chelicera here, and there's a couple of little organs down here that used to be legs that also are involved in pushing the food into their mouth. So the food gets pushed into their mouth. Then they have what's called a crop, which is just a bag that the food can go into, and a gizzard. And you know who else has a crop and a gizzard? Turkeys, chickens. So that their digestive tract is a lot like a bird's in terms of weight. And the sand that they take in when they're getting their food helps to grind their food up. So, all right, then the next two things I want to talk about in the anatomy are related also to human medicine and some of the science that's been done using the horseshoe crab. So now let's take a look at the back of the head here. Does anybody see eyes? You see some eyes there? Yeah. Those eyes are called the compound eyes. And you know how many eyes a horseshoe crab has? 10. A horseshoe crab has 10 eyes. Let me show you these. So when they're embryos and when they're developing in the egg, they only have 2 little eyes on the side. And those eyes go away as they develop. When they're 1 year old, they have these eyes that you're seeing, the big compound eyes, but they're not functional. Those eyes don't start working until they're 3 years old, 2 to 3 years old. So, and they also have 3 eyes right up here in the front. And let me show you. Let me get this going here. You can only see 2 of them here. See those little bright spots right there? See where the holes in the shell? So those eyes are sensitive to visible light, and they help keep the horseshoe crab oriented. They have another eye in here that you can't see, which is sensitive to UV light, and these eyes on the side are also sensitive to UV light once they become functional. And the reason that's so important is that they mostly feed and they mate and they do everything at night. But with their eyes being very sensitive to UV light, they can see almost as well at night as they can in the day. And actually, they sense diurnal cycle. They sense when the moon is out, and they make their eyes 1,000,000-fold more sensitive than they were during the day. And the function of the eyes for males is to find females. So the females release chemicals that say, we're here, it's time to make eggs. But the males find them with their eyes. Their eyes see up in front of them and behind them. That's the compound eye right there. And they've done some folks down in Woods Hole, not at the Oceanographic where I work, but at the Marine Biological Laboratory, did some experiments where they made concrete females and put them out in the shore when the crabs were breeding, and the males would come up and latch onto them. And they had to work hard to get them all. And it was only the males. The females, who had the same visual system, didn't go near the concrete casts of females, and none of the young ones did. So it's clear that they use the vision also to find them. The horseshoe crab also has two eyes on the underside near the mouth. And those eyes are for when they're swimming. So they can say, yep, I'm upside down, I'm swimming. Okay, so the light is coming in and giving them that signal. And the other place that they have eye sensors is on that telson, that tail. So there are sensors that sense light in their tail. And again, this is to set their daily cycling and to sense their orientation. So they've got 10 eyes, so they are really cool. The other thing about this from a scientific standpoint is the fellows who did some of the very early research on the function of the eye in the 1930s used the horseshoe crab to do that work. Because each of those little lenses that are in the horseshoe crab eye, whoops, that's the wrong one. Yeah. That was better. So each of those little lenses that are in the horseshoe crab eye is one of the largest in the animal kingdom, as is the retina at the bottom of it, as is the nerve that attaches to it and runs to the brain. So they were able to do a lot of the electrophysiology and define how vision was working using these guys. And those scientists in 1967 received a Nobel Prize for their work on the function of the eye, and they did it with these guys. So now the other thing, yeah, did somebody say, excuse me? No? Oh. So the other piece could you see the eyes? Sure. Yeah. So that's the compound eye.
Maybe go down to the other kids so they can see.
Okay, sure. And then there's the little eyes that are at the front. Okay. Can you see that? And that's the compound eye right there.
All the little teeny dots.
All the teeny dots, that's the one. It's like dragonfly eyes, or flies have compound eyes like that. Did you guys get to see it here? See the lit up eyes? And that's where two of the other prominent eyes are right there. Okay. So, the other thing I wanted to tell you about in terms of biomedicine, another importance for the horseshoe crab, is that they have a blue blood. So unlike our blood, which is red because we have iron in it, horseshoe crabs have blue blood because they have copper, which helps them to carry it out. And scientists who were looking at that blood at the oceanographic in Woods Hole, at the MBO in Woods Hole in the 1950s, discovered that there were also cells in the blood called amoebocytes. And those amoebocytes have the ability to recognize bad bacteria very well. It's part of the defense, the 450 million year old defense of the horseshoe crab for fighting bad bacteria themselves. But when they extract the compounds from those cells, they can very sensitively detect the presence of those bad bacteria. And there's a whole industry that has now evolved from that, because now all devices, artificial knees like I have, IV, solutions that people get when they're in hospitals, vaccines. I know some of you got vaccines, right? You love those. They're all tested with the extract from those cells from the horseshoe crab, and that will tell them that the thing that's going into you is safe. It's not going to cause you a problem. Okay, so, and the other interesting part about that is that my daughter, these kids' mom, who's in the back right there, she spent a summer collecting blood from these things for one of the companies that does that process. 2 summers, oh my goodness. So it was, how soon they forget. So, but the heart is right back along this thing here. If you look in this handout here again, now we want to look at this part. So that's the insides of the crab right there. See this red structure right here? That's the horseshoe crab heart. And it's the place where they would go in is very near where the fold is here, where that part of the abdomen bends. Right? Okay, you can correct me if that's right. That's right. So they would put a sterile needle in there, and they would take 25 to 30% of the blood from the crabs. And then they would extract those cells, and then that would become a product that was sold in the medical industry. And all of us have benefited from that. The crabs, not so much so. So part of the issue, part of the threat to horseshoe crabs is that, they're being used in the biomedical industry. They have strict standards in this country, so they have to have them back in the water 24 hours after they're collected now, and they have to be maintained in good conditions. But if you take 30% of the blood out of one of these animals, even if they're alive when they're returned, a lot of times they're compromised. They will not breed successfully, and of course they want the females because they're larger and have more blood. Or they might have other problems that mean their survivorship is not as good. The industry reports 15% as the mortality, but it's probably closer to 30%. But it's very important that we have that particular product. But one of the things they're doing to try to minimize the effect, because obviously they want these populations to survive and thrive in order that they can continue their business. But the bait industry is another major user of horseshoe crabs. So what they do is they collect the crabs and they basically kill them and use them to bait traps for eels and for conchs, whelks. And that is an ongoing issue. It's loosely regulated. They're still able to collect several million crabs a year for that purpose. So now the bleeding industry is coordinating with them, so at least they'll harvest the blood from the crabs before they're killed for bait. The other thing that they're doing, the Charles River Labs is one of the companies that is doing the horseshoe crab blood extractions. They've developed a very sensitive test, which is 20-fold more sensitive than the old one. So they can use 20-fold less of the crab blood to get the same result. So they've been working on it that way. Also, the proteins that do the reaction, there are 3 of them that come out of that extract from the cells. They're now synthesizing those outside of the crab, and they've got 2 out of 3 of them, and the 3rd one is in the works. So hopefully that threat to the horseshoe crabs will be gone. So I wanted to mention, besides being a hotel for animals that live on it, there are other important reasons for the horseshoe crab besides human needs. The horseshoe crabs are a food for loggerhead turtles. They, after they molt, they're soft, and a number of things will eat them. And their eggs are a major source of food for small fishes, shorebirds, striped bass eat them in the season, will eat the eggs and the larvae when they come out. And there is one particular story which is interesting. It's in one of these handouts here. There's a migrating bird called a red knot, and it makes one of the longest migrations in the world. It goes from Argentina down near the South Pole all the way to the Arctic regions near the North Pole. And it times its migration so that it can stop at the beaches where the horseshoe crabs have laid their eggs. And so they will double or triple their weight eating horseshoe crab eggs that they find, particularly in the Delaware Bay. That's where the largest population of crabs is. And they will double their weight when they come through on the way up. So as the crab populations diminish and the eggs, of course, become less abundant, it's going to compromise. They're seeing reductions in those shorebird migrations because they're challenged by not having enough food. So, let's see, was there anything else I want to tell you about? Just historically, they were collected, I'm not sure the proper way to pronounce it, the Lenape Indians, which were the Delaware tribes, they actually ate part of the horseshoe crab. They would eat part of the abdomen, basically, as a food. They used the shells to bail out their canoes, and they would use the telson, the tail, as a tip for spears. So they were utilized by them. The other three species that are in Asia are also being overutilized. They're fished mostly by trawlers rather than being hand collected, and they're fished for both the medical industry but also as food. The Asians eat 2 out of 3 of the crabs and their eggs. So those populations are endangered. So ours are threatened and theirs are endangered. So I want you guys just to kind of be aware of how cool these guys are, how long they've survived. The dinosaurs didn't stomp them to death, but we might wipe them out if we're not careful with what we do. When we do development in the coastal zone, every time someone puts a riprap wall there or protects their property in some way from the rising global warming and the rising sea levels, that takes away habitat for the horseshoe crab. So you should just be thinking about that. And the best thing you can do as a young citizen scientist is when you're out walking the beaches after they made it and you see a guy lying on his back, squiggling, turn him over, buy the shell, put him back in the water if you can. Okay, yes?
I've seen me and my sister have seen a horseshoe crab at the beach in the water.
Yes, that's where they like to be.
Right towards us.
Cool.
We just
Cool.
ran away.
Wow. You guys ran away or the horseshoe crab ran away? You did. Oh, good choice. They do look pretty scary, don't they?
And they're very spiky.
They are very spiky. Some of this, I think, didn't you see some of the ones when they were bleeding at Associates of Cape Cod when they were bleeding them? Weren't some of them spikier when they were coming up from the south? Yeah, so there are subspecies that do have differences in size, and obviously the ones down south are active all year. By the way, my shirt has an Associates of Cape Cod logo on it. That's why I wore it today. My official T-shirt for giving this lecture. So the other thing I want to show you then is I'm going to feed one of these little crabs. I've only done this experiment once, so hopefully it'll work today. But I'm going to turn them over because actually they're okay when they're upside down. And I'm going to give him a little bit of food. So let me get the food first. Yeah. Oops. It's a little bit thawed there.
What do they eat? What's that food?
This food is, these are brine shrimp, which is, not part of their normal diet, but it's a good invertebrate diet source, and they've been fed with spirulina, which is a nutritive algae. So what they do, since plants are part of the diet, if you feed them, this is obviously not something they eat in the wild, but it has everything that they should be getting in their diet. And these guys have thrived for a month and have been molting, so we know they're happy with it, we think. All right, let me turn this guy over. Come on, little fella.
Is it a boy or a girl?
They both, I meant to tell you about that. So in the last molt, this is a girl crab, so you don't get to see it. But in the last molt, the boy crabs develop a special claw in that front claw right there. This one right here at the end. And it changes into something that looks like a boxing glove. And if you look in this handout right here, you can see right here, it's in that other one, yeah. So this happens only in the last molt of the crab. So when he's going to be an adult and not grow anymore, he develops a special claw. It looks like a boxing glove, and it's got a hook on it that he can hold on to the female with. The other thing that males have, and unfortunately I don't have a male crab to show you, but the female front of the crab is relatively flat like this. On the male, it's curved. So that allows him to be attached to her more readily because he's got a curvature in here. Oops. Uh-oh. So this part of his carapace is curved. So, oops. Yeah. All right, let me see if I can get this guy happy. All righty. All right, can you see all of his parts here? There's the pusher legs. There's the chelicera that put the food into the mouth. All right.
Step a little to the side. It's hard.
Oh, am I blocking you?
There you go.
Yeah. And do we need the extra light? Is that going to make it better, or was it all right without it? Actually, maybe we don't need it, huh? All right, so. Yeah, the scientist is too. Do you guys want to come over here? Yeah, just come on over. Yeah. Then you can see him a little better. Yeah. Come on over. All right. See him right there? Now, we're going to put a little food in here. Okay, watch him. See him? See him grabbing the food? See? All right, now he's going to push it into his stomach. Right there. He did it. See him? See him pushing the food in? So his stomach is right in the middle, or his mouth is right in the middle of those legs. And it's almost automatic. They almost have no control over it when the food is there. They just go right after it. Give him a little bit more here. Pay him for his troubles. See how the legs are pushing it all into the center? And there's some special modified, used to be legs called chylaria that work like the chelicera at the top to stuff everything into their tummy. Can you see his legs? Yeah, isn't that cool? They are very neat. So, we also have some craft projects that we'd like to do. So one of the projects is to make a horseshoe crab hat. Very stylish. Yeah. I tried to wear it for this presentation. My wife said I look like a fool. So we're going to take her word for it. So anyway, so if you'd like to make a crab, you can get it right here. What you want to do is like what I did. You want to draw the eyes on, and you can use the pictures or the molds to figure out where the eyes should go. I added the extra little eyes here. They look like nostrils, but I put a little extra eyes on mine. And you can color them or decorate them any way you want. So those projects are right here. Now, and this is a color. On one side, it's a coloring page right here. So you can color your horseshoe crab. What color do you think horseshoe crabs are and why?
Brown so they can camouflage?
Brown so they can camouflage. Sometimes they're darker, greener, and tanner. It depends on where they are. If they're in darker water, a lot of times the crab himself will be darker. So, and I've seen some that are black, some molts that are black, but that's because they sat in muds that were anoxic. It wasn't something that happened during their lives. So anyway, you can take one of these, and on the back is a word find. And it's got some of the important features of the horseshoe crabs. And if you would like, you can take home one of these build your own 3D model crabs, but that would definitely need probably an adult assistant, or for the older kids, I think that would be more appropriate. And the other thing you can do, if you want to take a stab at it, is figure out how old your molts are, how old the molts are in here, and how old the ones on your table are. I've only got one of these, so we'll pass it around. All right.